All right, welcome to the Fit Bucks podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, welcome there as well. Make sure you subscribe so you get notifications. Got an awesome podcast today. Nic is joining us. We're going to be talking about his journey, medical professional in the PT industry. It's an awesome opportunity because his story, it shows you guys what's possible and that you don't have to, spend 30 years to generate wealth. And he'll go through his story. One thing I will tell you guys, everybody's story is different. One thing might apply to you. He did it. It might not 100% apply to you. There's different risk tolerances, all that type of stuff. But his story shows you how, when you start understanding this stuff and you start getting creative with it, how you can get to that next level in terms of wealth generation and whatnot. So, Nic, without further ado, welcome to the podcast. Glad to have you on board. And go ahead and introduce yourself. Give us a little bit about your background. Probably start off, going into PT school, where just undergrad, all that stuff, further interest in PT school. And let's go from there.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Joseph. I appreciate it. So my name is Nic King, full name Nicholas, obviously. Did my undergraduate schooling at Cal State Monterey Bay, got a bachelor's in kinesiology, go Otters. After that, I went down to San Diego Mesa College and completed my PTA schooling. That was in 2015. I primarily practiced in outpatient orthopedics for the last 7 years, but I do have experience in the hospital systems as well as home health. And in 2021, I finally made a jump to the academia world. So I'm a director of clinical education now for a developing PTA program out of Sacramento, California. And that's been really fun too. I do miss practicing a little bit here and there, just being interactive with the patients, of course, and seeing colleagues and all that. But academia world's been real fun as well. So I'm enjoying the ride.
Yeah, good old Sacramento. Grown a lot since I was younger, but actually, side story, it's good thing about Monterey is you can't really get in trouble down there, so it's easy to graduate. I was at a wealth management firm in Monterey for about a year and a half. They had transferred me down there, and those of you that have never been to Monterey, it's beautiful, it's fun. I mean, Pebble Beach is there and everything. Carmel's there. It's awesome, but the nightlife pretty much ends about 9 o'clock every night.
Yeah, it's funny. Me and my girlfriend just went back there recently in the past year, and we're staying out and getting a couple drinks and some and so we're getting ready to go to dinner. It's like 7:38, and we finally get on the downtown area, Alvarado Street, and we're looking for somewhere to eat, and every place is closed. Yeah. And so luckily I had a buddy who was working at the Marriott. He got the chef to fire up the grill for us so we have something to eat. We didn't eat till like 9:30 at night.
Yeah, side note, so my parents still live in San Jose. For those of you that don't know, I grew up in San Jose and then moved out to Texas about 3 years ago. And so I took my daughter back to go see her grandparents, and we went down to the Monterey Bay Aquarium. And inflation, let's just say inflation's a real thing in California. I was like, holy shit, how much is this stuff? And then we went over to Santa Cruz. It was like to ride one ride at the boardwalk was $12. It's like, holy
wow.
crap. So I was joking with my dad. He's like, yeah, gas is effing $6 a gallon. I'm like, in Texas it's $2.80.
Oh, really? It's only $2.80. Oh my God.
So I just paid dropped quite a bit. It's going back up a little bit now that oil is going up, but it was lower. So good stuff. So you graduated 2016, 2017. What, just from your finances, when you first graduated, student loan debt, how much did you have? Did you have any at all? I know you mentioned, some stuff about living at parents strategically. What was your situation that you were looking at when you first graduated?
Yeah. So I was, people are going to hate this comment that I'm about to drop, but when I graduated PTA school, I only paid $1,200. I refused to buy any books. I was the guy emailing the professor for the presentations. Didn't buy any books. I went down to San Diego with about 6 to 10 grand in my pocket from what I saved up previously while working summers. And then every PTA school was 2 years. So that summer I came home and saved up the next amount I needed. I was lucky enough. I got into PTA school last minute. So I called one of my buddies down in San Diego. Hey, can I crash on your couch? Give you a couple $100 a month. wrote it out, lived out of my suitcase. I literally got accepted 3 days before the program started and had to drop everything I was doing, boogie down there.
Yep.
So I lived on the couch, out of my suitcase for about 2 years. Yeah, I spent $1,200 for PTA school total. Undergrad, I came out with about 12 grand of student debt. So I was sitting pretty, and not to go on a different topic, but that was kind of like what I always imagined between going to PT school and PTA school. Cause I had a lot of authentic conversations with therapists like, hey, don't mind me asking, how much was Regis University? And that was back in 2010 when I was 8 at a clinic in Monterey, and, you know, pick another therapist's brain. And I heard the price tag on it, and I was just not attracted to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And those price tags, especially since then, I mean, gone up a lot. I would say 2010 and 20 now it's probably doubled. So yeah, it's, as you guys know, especially the PTs that are going to be listening to this, you guys know how ugly it is, or how expensive it is, I should say. So, you know, no surprise on there. So that was the situation. You had graduated, you know, you're looking at different finances. You know, share with them the story. You told me, you know, getting about your first paycheck. Cause I get this from a lot of new grads, or they're just like, what? So yeah, go ahead and share with everybody that story.
Yeah. So I was ready to, you know, when I came back, I was ready to work. And so I worked as a licensed applicant initially, and I was doing the 40-hour a week. I was like, I want it, you know, I want it all. I want to work as much as I can. And so I get my first paycheck, and I remember sitting late at night, 12 o'clock, watching it to deposit in my bank account. And I got it that night, and I was like, well, that's it. And so I kind of slept it off. And I called my boss the next morning. I was like, hey, Bob, I think HR messed up on my paycheck. He's like, read me the numbers. What does it say? And I read off to him everything. And he said, no, bud, welcome to the real world. That's how taxes work.
Yeah.
And then I was in complete shock. I was like, I am getting smoked on taxes and everything else.
Yep. So, you know, as you progressed and started working, you know, what did you start looking at? Like those taxes coming out, you know, set off a light bulb for you. Like, what did you start looking into? Why did you start looking into it? You know, in terms of investments and wealth building, you know, where did you decide to go? And, you know, just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I had a couple of influences, I like to say, that kind of pointed me in the direction. Like I was telling you earlier, my grandparents were big real estate flippers in the Bay Area in the 70s and 80s. I was never really attracted to the flipping side of things. And then at the same time, I had one of my best friends who happens to be my realtor. I just saw him when I was in school, and when I got out of school, he was just buying property left and right. Anything he get his hands on, he was buying. And you're talking, 2016, 17, 18, all the way up. And I had a conversation with my boss after that, and he's like, you know, after that's, you know, the paycheck scenario, and he's like, yeah, you need to start investing. And I was like, well, what do you think? And he's like, he told me straight up, he's like, I like real estate. I don't like stocks. I like real estate. And so he started educating me a little bit more of the benefits, you know, of real estate. And that's what attracted me the most. And I think as cliche as it sounds, one of the biggest things for me, and not just because of the tax benefits, the appreciation, bonus depreciation, et cetera, the write-offs, it was the tangible asset, and actually seeing it and seeing like, hey, I own that. You know, technically the bank's in the first position, but I own that.
Yep.
And that was like the best feeling in the world. And because I never thought I was going to actually own a house, to be honest, even for myself, or have investment properties. I never thought I was gonna get my hands on that. So that's where I got going.
Yep. Yeah. And we'll talk about more of that journey, but this is what I wanted to highlight too. When I talked about, you know, this was your journey you took, everybody's different. One of the big things about real estate is the tax benefit of it, and also the tangible piece. I talk to people all the time that were in real estate, and I mean, being in the finance world, I always sit there and I listen to these guys like, you know, you're stupid to go into real estate. You should always go into stocks. And then the real estate guys are like, no, you're stupid. It's like, no, neither people are stupid. It is what, you know, which one you like going into the most. Like I even know people that are like, I don't do any of that. I just go into businesses and just create businesses. That's their investment. And then they want to
Mhm.
sell them for $5 to $10 million. And they just keep doing it over every 5 to 10 years, just new business after new business after new business. And that's their strategy. So there's no bad strategy to go after. But the big thing about the real estate one, I hear this from a lot of real estate investors, is that it's tangible. Like they can actually touch it and see it. They know what it is, and they can point to it and say, that's the piece that I own. So yeah, I hear that a lot. So, when did you buy your first property? What did you do? How did you do it strategically? Like, just talk about some of the things that you learned and how you did it, and, just where it was and all that type of stuff.
Yeah, so I think I'll start with one of the biggest things I learned, and I was so naive at the time, how little money you need to get into the door of real estate. And with the conversation I originally had with my buddy again, who's my realtor, when we were looking at houses, and I was punching, the percentages down for a property. I thought it was always 20%, 20, 25. And I was like, I looked at it, I was like, Beto, I can't afford this. This is, that's 60 grand out of my bank. I'll have nothing. And so the biggest thing I learned right off the bat was, again, how little it actually takes to get in. So with that being said, this was 2016. I had actually moved to Sacramento to work a little bit up there, and I was renting, and I was paying, like probably almost $1,700 in Midtown Sacramento, phenomenal area. But I was like, this is stupid. I was like, why am I renting when I can buy something? Fast forward, I come back to Modesto. It's where I live now, and I talked to my buddy like, hey, I want to buy a house. And so that's how I got in the first one, and that's where I learned about, hey, no, you don't have to put 20% down. You can even go 15, 10, 5, even 3.5, even 3% if you use like a 97.3 loan. And so that's how I got started. And just to kind of piggyback a little bit more, how I kept the ball rolling is I was lucky enough to work in different cities throughout the Central Valley. And so year after year, I'd have to basically go to a new city to work. And so I needed a new place to live because I didn't want to commute 45 minutes to hour. So the next city, for example, that I worked in after Modesto was about 45 minutes south. And so I told, again, my realtor, like, hey, I don't want to commute. What can you do? And he's like, well, you can use an owner occ strategy. And I was like, well, what's owner occ? He's like, where you purchase it as owner occupant, not an investment. And so, but you have to live there. I said, okay. So that's how we got rolling on the second, and so on and so forth. Basically, my work schedule was able to dictate where I was actually going to buy property, which was nice, but I got in the door with cheaper capital, cheaper interest rates because of the owner occupancy. And I did that for a couple of years because I like to say I was a team player and I commuted around for the company. But that got me to a portfolio of 7 properties, with the mix of single family and multifamily.
Yeah. And so those of you that don't know, when you go to buy a house, like if you claim it as your primary, that's what's owner occupied. And so the interest rates are significantly lower than an investment property. And so Nic, he had an opportunity because he was working for a company where they were opening up multiple clinics. That's why he was going from one, because he was going in and opening the clinics with them. And so you would work for like what? You said like a year, like maybe even less
Yeah.
than 8 months. And then you had to go to the next city to open up the next clinic. And so every time he moved, he was able to use an owner occ loan because he was living in the place. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And some of you might be saying, well, how do I do the same thing? And there's a lot of you guys would be PTs listening to this, OTs listening to this, nurses that are listening to this. I see a lot of that opportunity with travelers, because when you travel, you're going to be living there and you can potentially claim that as an owner occ. The only tough part about travel stuff is your income stipend. So it might be harder to qualify, but that's why you bring on a partner. Like I've seen a lot of travelers that want to do something like this, where they bring on like a parent's friend or something like that, where they actually have them come on and co-sign on the loans. So that way they can qualify easier. So like I said, everybody's route's a little bit different. But to Nic's point, it might not need that much down. And again, some of those industries like PA, NP, DPTs, Some of you guys may know this because you've seen some of the stuff we've been putting out on social media, but we just partnered with a few mortgage companies, one of them specifically Neo Home Loans, for example. They can do medical home loans for those professions. And I can't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, but you can get like an $850,000 loan at 3.5% down payment. Like, so you can do that without an FHA loan. You just have to have be a primary residence. For those of you that are just starting, Nick, you brought up the multifamily. That's the big thing that I always talk about. Like, if you're going to do something like that, your first property, like get a duplex or a triplex, and if you can, a fourplex. And
Yeah.
so how many of those properties that you bought were multi-unit?
So I have one, and that's a duplex. But to your point, I always recommend that. And there's a bunch of strategies out there how to get into real estate. But what I really recommend, and I tell everyone now, whether it's PT, RN, even friends that I get calls from, use a 4-3-2-1 strategy. So start with a quad, then go to a tri, then do, and then the single family, and then you got 10 units right there.
Yep.
Yeah,
I'm big on the multi-units just because, especially when you're starting. Because where I've seen a lot of people get hurt is they'll buy like a condo. Like my buddy bought a condo here in Austin 5-6 years ago, and it was just one thing, and he didn't realize it. It was like, oh crap, like I lost my tenant. It's like, oh shit, like I got to pay for all this stuff. And it's like, yeah, like you got to get this thing rented again really fast. And so with a fourplex or a triplex, you have different incomes offsetting that. Like if you lose a tenant or whatnot, not only that, but the valuations tend to be a lot higher. They grow faster. So go ahead, Nick.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say I have this conversation a lot too with the valuations of it, not to get sidetracked, but that's the big thing too. Looking at the rent rolls, specifically if you get into the real estate game and you're getting ready to maybe liquidate. And for a lot of investors, one of the big things they look at is the rent rolls and what actually is being produced from your tenants, to look at the actual valuation and the cap rate and all that. So like for me now, as I've seasoned my years as an investor for the last 7-8 years, the first thing I always look at, especially for multifamily, is looking at the rent roll first. That's the first thing I look at.
Yep. And the tough part with the rent roll, like when you're looking at a fourplex or a triplex, the rent roll holds up. Like when you look at a condo, for example, like a single unit condo or a single family house, you potentially have rent roll, but you're also dependent on the primary market. People might be buying that house to actually live in. And so there's different factors that come into play on that single family. Whereas when you have like a triplex or a fourplex, it's like, no, this is an investment property. And so those rent rolls will help bankroll that. And then like right now, those of you that don't know what cap rates are, that's like one of the back of the napkin ways the value of property. Like cap rates are starting to go back up. And personally, what I think is that, as interest rates go up, they're going to be going down again soon, probably in a year or two. When it goes down, cap rates go back up, which means property values go right back up. So a lot of you have been asking me, like, should we buy single family houses right now? It's like, well, if you can, I'd try to start getting into like duplexes and triplexes. It's just tough because of the interest rate. But if you can claim one of them as your primary, like one of the units, and still get in there and get it like a lower interest rate loan because it's not an investment, hell yeah, do it. Like, so.
Yeah, I will say too, because people knock the single family housing for rentals, but California, there's a big caveat. So California is really, tenant friendly, AB 1482, which can cause a lot of headaches. But single families, if you operate them under a sole proprietorship LLC, they're protected under what's called the Costa-Hawkins Act. So they don't have rent increase limits. So you can raise rents 100% if you want. Not if you want. I mean, you don't want to be a slumlord or that person, of course. But people don't think about that, especially in California. Like everyone's just dogging and trying to be real bullish on the multifamily. Sometimes I kind of take a step back and I look at the single family and like, okay, well, I don't have to deal with 5% plus CPI rent cap. I could just stay Costa-Hawkins doesn't have a limit on it, essentially. So yeah, there's a lot of loopholes.
Yep. And there's again, that's why every state, every city is different. That's one of the big things you got to look at. Like I own property in San Jose still, and I mean, it's all single family, right? Because it was stuff that I used to live in, now they're rented. But it's the same type of thing, right? You hold them in an LLC, you're fine. So, good point on all that. Any advice on somebody looking to get started? Like where did you go to say, look, I know that you brought up a couple people in the industry that you talked to and whatnot, but was there anything that you went out on the web and started reading or books that you started reading about? Where did you get like just more knowledge on all this stuff?
Yeah, so I've read the Rich Dad Poor Dads. I've looked at Bigger Pockets, of course. There's a gentleman, I'll shout him out, Michael Zuber. He's from One Rental at a Time. He's based out of Fresno. I think he has like 180 doors or something. I started following him back when he started on YouTube. I think it was 17, 18, somewhere in there. But he brings on a variety of people, multifamily syndicators, a lot of savvy investors. Like you're talking guys and gals with, 100 doors plus. So I got a lot of information from there, but a lot of it was actually my best friend. I mean, we sat down week after week at some points and just had a lot of conversation. His background, his family has a lot of property in Mexico, property here. He's a savvy realtor, really good realtor. So I started picking his brain. He connected me to a lot of different lenders. That's how I really learned about the loan products and what's out there, how to leverage safely, how to mitigate a lot of risk, and how to deal with turbulence. So I'd say that whole pie kind of got me to where I was in terms of my knowledge base.
Yeah. And, I've had the question, like, how do I know so much about real estate? One, because a lot of times people are like, on the webinars that we do and stuff, it's like investing is my background and people will automatically gravitate towards like, well, stocks and options. And it's like, yeah, that's what I do. And I also build businesses like that. Those are the two things that I've always gravitated towards. Real estate, I never really gravitated towards, but yet I own a couple of properties and because I know the loopholes, but my family members, I mean, I was just thinking about it right now between my parents, because that's all my dad did, because he's in the same thing as you, tangible assets. Like he wants that tangible asset. I'll never forget when I graduated from college, I was like, Dad, you're so stupid. Like if you would have put that money in the stock market, this would it be worth? And he was like, I don't give a shit because I can't touch it. Like, I'm like,
Yeah.
all right, like I get it. But between like them and my wife's parents, like, combined, we own something like 15 like doors, 20 doors, something like that. And so I've been around real estate my whole life. And like my first major investment was when I was 12 years old. I call it major. It was like $5,000. It was like all the money I had at 12 years old. And it was a great learning experience because I got scammed out of it all. So
Right.
it was fantastic. It was fantastic. But yeah, that's, it's doable. People always ask like, well, I don't have enough money to be in real estate. Like for example, Nick, have you ever made like when you 2016, 2017, were you making 150 grand a year, 200 grand a year, anything like that?
No, I will say at that point I was probably pushing 90 to 100K, but I was working like a dog. You're talking, 5 days a week outpatient, 2 days and the weekends in the hospital, working holidays, saving every penny. I think that the main question to your point is how do you harvest the capital, right? Everyone's like, well, how do you stack that much money especially if you're dealing with loans, all that stuff, and that's real life scenarios. And I was lucky. I lived with my parents for about 2 years, and again, I didn't pay a lot of money for school, so I will say that helped me out a lot because I didn't have a lot of loans. But one of the main things my parents told me when I started living with them was like, you better save every damn dime you have, and you better buy a house. And I was like, okay. And again, I was like, at the point I wasn't even thinking about it. I never wanted, a house for myself. And I was like, okay, I could see, I could see the writing on the wall by doing this. And, but again, back to the, how do you actually harvest it? Right. And I tell everyone, there's going to be some point in your life where you're going to have to work a shit ton and it's not going to be comfortable. You're either going to do it in your 20s or you're going to do it in your 30s.
Yep.
So, and that's, I think every therapist goes through that, where you're going to work those PRN jobs. You're going to work, 25 out of 30 days of the month, and you're going to have to do it if you want to get to the next level. That's just reality.
Yeah. And I was just thinking about this. I'm doing some quick numbers on this. Okay. If you work 40 hours a week, right? And you work 40 hours a week for 30 years. And let's just say you make $40 an hour. That's about $2.4 million in income that you'll create in those 30 years. Okay. Or you can work 80 hours a week for 15 years and get the same amount of money in 15 years versus 30. And then if you started that at 30 years old, by the time you're 40 or 45, you're retired. Because not only now you're getting that money fast forward, but you're also investing it. So it's also growing.
Right.
I don't understand. I actually did a podcast on this about 2 years ago. I was like, I don't understand why everybody in their 20s and 30s, like I get the whole thing. Like I want to travel, I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to life. But it's like, do you just realize that if you just crush it out for like 5 to 10 years, how much money you will have? And then you can work part-time if you want to in your 30s and your 40s and have some money. And I know somebody that did that really, like they're a traveler. They love it. They travel 6 months out of the year. Like, he works part-time, he works for 6 months and then crushes it out for 6 months and then goes and travels. Like, or other people that I met, they do that. They get a good base underneath them. And then they go out and they create their own business. So then they can leverage that and sell that for a couple $100,000 or millions of dollars or whatever it is. So like I said, I know we're getting off topic on that, but I love crushing it out for 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I think just at some point you're going to have to do it, and not to give. I'm not here to give anyone financial advice per se either, but I've even I've leveraged a 401k loan too before, and those are great tools. There's just so many options you can use to get your foot in the door, and I think it's always so scary because they're like, for example, the 401k thing. Everyone's like, well, why are you borrowing against your 401k? And I was like, well, because it got me a class A property that's appreciated $250,000 in the last 3 years now, and I just paid myself back the loan. It was a 15K loan, and I paid it. I paid it back to myself. You're just paying yourself the principal and the interest, and I didn't get penalized. So there's tons of options you can leverage, and I think people get really just tunnel vision of the traditional model, how to, I just have to work, save, work, save, work, save. And I'm all for that too. Like you said, you got to go 5 to 10 years, put off the trips to Mexico and Europe, buckle down, and then use your resources.
Yep. And that's one of the things that, like, your parents said you better be doing X, Y, Z with, right? One of the things that we've just started discussing with people, like when they're building their financial plans on FitBucks, is there's basically 3 categories that you could put your money into. Your day-to-day money, which is like your expenses, like food and stuff. You could go ahead and put it into assets or debt. So that's the second category, is those 2 things. The third category is like risk management for like insurances and stuff. And so most people, when they graduate, about 50% of their income is going towards expenses, and about 20 to 30% towards assets and debt. And then the rest is going towards insurance. And it's like, your goal is to get to like 50% of your income going to assets and debt. Like that's what we strive for. Like when somebody's tracking their financial plan on our technology, that's one of the things we point out, like what percentage is going to that category of paying off or building assets or paying off debt. Because if you can get to 50% of your income on that, like you said, within 5 or 10 years, you're going through the roof. The closer you get to that 50%, and the more assets you generate, the more money is going to be you're going to be producing that income, and you got more money now throwing at assets and debt. Like, and it's just snowballing, and boom, it blows up fat, like really quickly. So,
yeah. And I think that's where I'm at. It's funny. I talked to my old boss yesterday, cause he's like, we were just talking about it, and somehow we started talking about passive income, and he's like, yeah, I know you love passive income. And I was like, well, cash isn't king, cash flow is king.
Yep.
And I'm at that point now where I got a blizzard going, because I did that, these last 5 to 7 years, and the cash flow I'm getting now is just, it's bananas, and knock on wood, it's been consistent. I haven't had any problems, but I feel like I'm taking off even more now.
Yeah. And you could just keep investing more and more and more. And, it's exponential growth basically at the end of the day. And to get to that 50% of your income going to those things, that's what helps fuel it. So before we wrap up, first of all, thanks for coming on. Any other words of advice or any other things that you'd like to share with everybody listening?
No, I would just say, just if something, I think financial freedom's always on everyone's mind. And I think unfortunately in the PT world, we put ourselves on a certain timeline just because of the industry and all that stuff. But again, I will just say, if you're gonna do it, just do it, hunker down for, again, 5 to 10 years, and just be disciplined and do your due diligence, and that's it.
Yep, absolutely. One question I have, because I know I'm going to get this afterwards, is
Mm.
two questions. Have you ever looked at buying outside of a place that you live at, like in another state? And second question, have you looked at any of these other like new like funds that invest in properties that they're not quite REITs, but they're, little startup funds of people pooling their money and saying, hey, we're going to buy this place and, this condo in Austin and whatnot. Have you looked into any of that stuff? Because I know that's a huge hot trend that's coming on right now with the internet.
Yeah. So for your first question, I've always looked out of state. Like I looked at Clarksville, Tennessee for a while. I just I go with the old school advice. If you can't drive an hour to see it, then don't buy it. And that's how I've just always kind of rolled. But I think in the future, I think I'll take the plunge at some point, but it just has to be real lucrative. And it's, obviously got to cash flow and meet the other metrics that I look at. And then for the second question, no, I haven't. I haven't really heard of this trend going on.
Yeah, there's little things like I've seen them on a couple on like Republic, Fundera, some of these other places where it's like, you put $1,000 in here and they go in and buy this thing, and then like, you can go $2,000, 5,000, whatever it is. And to me, it's like it's a real estate investment trust is basically what it is. It's like there's
Mhm.
nothing new there. It's just there again with the advent of technology, those things used to be private, and now they've been able to put them up on the internet and try to bring them to everybody.
I do know. Well, I know local investors who will, ask people if they want to commit investments and capital and stuff, but I've never heard of anything like on the internet like that.
Yeah. Personally, like, because I get this question all the time, do you invest in those? My answer is no. And the reason being is because I got into the mortgage industry in 2007. So I saw a lot of bad shit. And like I told you, like my first investment at 12 years old, like that, it wasn't a scam, but they just mismanaged the funds. And so to me, it's like I have a major issue going into those, because as much transparency as they give you, you can't control how they're using leverage and control how they're managing the cash flow and all that type of stuff. And I've seen so many of those things tank that I'm just like, if I'm doing this, either I'm doing it by myself or I'll go in with a group of people, but I'm going to be the running it because I'm a financial
Right.
investment expert. That's what I do. Like, I'm not going to let somebody else do this for me. Like when I can do it, like I'll hire people to help me, but I want to have a say what's going on with that cash flow and that money and how is it being managed and how is it being distributed. Because if that's out of my control, it's like, in my opinion, if that's out of my control, let's go in the stock market. Like that's out of my control too. And I got better opportunity to get a better return off that. So I'm going that
Right.
way. So that's, I wanted to make sure I throw that in there because, I get that question all the time. And I wanted to see if you've looked into that or invested in any of those and, go from there. So,
Yeah. No experience on that end.
so where's the next unit going to be bought at? Or have you started looking at it? Or are you out right now just because of where interest rates have gone up to and all that stuff?
Yeah, good question. So I think the end goal for me personally is to get into big multifamily. So at some point, I'm as of right now, I'm kind of letting everything just kind of ride out. Again, seeing where these rates are going, and obviously our current economic environment. But at some point, I want to 1031 all my properties into a big multifamily. Like 40, 50 plus doors, and just wrap it up like that.
Yeah, those of you that don't know what an exchange is, basically you take your capital or your capital gains, roll it into other properties, and you just defer the taxes on it. So it's how you can start acquiring more and more. So
Yeah, and we'll see how this cyclical cycle rolls out. But I don't have a timeline, obviously, but that's the end goal for me.
yeah, perfect. So Nic, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure to interview people when they're hitting those, stories of building wealth. So I love it. If you guys have questions or you're listening to this and you'd like to share your story, both good and bad. I know we talk a lot with people that are hitting it good. if you've had stuff where you hit road bumps and, different things like that too, share it. That's how we all learn from each other. So thanks again. And again, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe there. We'll be talking to everybody soon.